Hey everybody, welcome to today's class. We have a special guest today, Carol Allen, to discuss orchids with us. So I'm going to go over a few quick notes and then hand things over to her because I know everybody's eager to hear about orchids. Just for those of you who are new to these classes, welcome. This is a webinar style Zoom call, so it's not like a regular meeting. We can't actually see you and we can't speak to you. So if you have questions during the class, you'll type those questions into the Q&A box on your Zoom menu, and I'll be monitoring those. Carol's probably she's gonna try and take questions, I think about halfway through the class, and then she'll stay at the end to take questions. So we will probably go over the regular hour to try and get more questions answered. So thank you, Carol, for staying after class to do that. We appreciate it. We will be sending out a recording following the class, and I'll be providing Carol's email address for anybody who has questions. So if you have to leave before you can get your question answered, you can follow up with us, send Carol an email, and we will be happy to assist you. She will be happy to assist you as well. So quick introduction of Carol. Carol Allen is also known as the Orchid Lady. She has been doing these classes with us for a while, and she worked as the supervisory horticulturalist at the United States Botanic Garden Conservatory, has a degree in horticulture, among many, many other qualifications. So we're very glad to have her with us today. Carol, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
All right, thank you so very much. Let me do a quick screen share here and get this baby going. Old computer, so it takes, just a second. So everybody should see an absolutely gorgeous purple, and I do mean, deeply purple, Phalaenopsis looking straight at you, and the title Demystifying Orchid Growing, and I hope to be able to do that for you. All right, baby. So where do we usually buy orchids? I don't know about you, but now that COVID has lightened up a little bit, I'm a little bit more comfortable going into the grocery store. And the grocery store people, they know that. And they have a tendency to put all of those flowers like right by the door. When you're thinking about eggs and hamburger helper, they're going flowers. And orchids are right there. So you look at them and you go, oh, I need a thrill. I need a lift. I need something this week. And the next thing you know, there's an orchid in your basket. It happens to me. It happens to you. It's usually how it's an impulse buy. But now that numbers are down, COVID numbers are down, guess what? We have orchid shows. We have in-person orchid shows coming into the spring season, and masks are usually required. All of the shows, I know the venues, they're very big and airy. They're not small. So I think if you're vaccinated and boosted and pretty healthy and masked and stay away from people, you should be able to enjoy an in-person orchid show, and I urge you to go. So I have some tips. Now, I know when I think about it that there is an exhibition part of the show, and then there's the vendors. Can anybody guess where Carol goes first? It's the vendors. Of course I do. The show is not going anyplace, but that one orchid that I'm dying for might. So these are little tips to help you go through the vendors and come out happy. All right. So the first and foremost, try not to be dazzled by the flowers. If you're looking at a plant and you're hearing those violins playing the Romeo and Juliet theme, and it's the one I've always wanted, I need you to take a deep breath. Look at the leaves. All right. This is an oncidium I've just put up here just as an example. Look at the leaves. Okay. Look at the pseudobulbs. That's a pseudo bulb, false bulb. Okay. Have the leaf tips been trimmed off? If the leaf tips have been trimmed off, and I don't care if they trim them in a point, you want to say, why did the end of that leaf die? Okay. You want not only dazzling flowers, you want a healthy plant. So these are some of the things that I look for. So are the leaf ends trimmed? What about the pseudobulbs? All right. This part of the plant should be fat and full. See how they're ridged and they're dehydrated. And look, every pseudobulb is dehydrated. Yeah, it's got some new growth, and that's the good news. And the leaves on this picture look okay, although there's some wrinkling there and there's wrinkling there. So even if that was carrying a spike of flowers, I might go, maybe I walk away from this one, all right? But put that thought aside, because I'm going to come back to maybe you buy it, but you have to know why, okay? So also know that when you go to a show and you go to the vendors, and vendors are nice people. I've been in the orchid world for a long time, lots of decades, okay? And these are nice people, but typically the plant that you look at with the dazzling flowers has been overpotted. In other words, it probably came to the vendor in like a 4-inch pot from Hawaii or from wherever. No, most vendors have not grown their plants. They are brought in, okay? So know that. They buy it in this little 4-inch pot, and then they're going to bump it into a 6-inch pot, because when you look at it, we evaluate the value, sorry. We judge the value, there we go, better word, by the size of the pot. And that's okay, it's all right. In most plants, it works, but in orchids, it could be overpotted. All right, and I call this a value added effect. The thing of it is that, and as you go along in your orchid growing journey, you'll learn that orchids do not like grow room in a pot. Now, there are some exceptions, but generally they are close in a pot. Like our Oncidium guy here, you're going to say, oh, he's got no room to grow. I'm like, he's fine. Really, they like to be close in a pot. I liken it to being like when you swaddle a baby, they kind of like that security. Orchids do too. So if this guy were in, our example guy were in a much bigger pot, I'd know that it was value added potted. And one of the first things I would do would be to tear it apart and repot it. But we'll come to that. Okay. Understand that the vendor wants to sell you an orchid. That has a tendency to motivate people to say things that, I don't want to say they're prevarications, but just use your good judgment, okay? And also, when you walk up to an orchid and you don't recognize it, you might say, well, what is that? And they'll say, well, that's a Wilsonara Bright Star's blue eyes. And you're going, what? You have no idea. So the translation is, that's an Oncidium intergeneric. And then the next question out of your mouth is going to be, well, how do I grow it? Well, they're going to launch into how they grow it in a greenhouse, which is a totally different environment than you and I when we grow under lights, on a windowsill, or a little tiny greenhouse like I have. Totally different. So that even though they're earnest and they want to help you grow it, the advice they give you may not be suitable for your environment. So how do you find out how to grow orchids? Join your local orchid society. There are a lot of people who've been growing orchids for a long time. You can visit them. If you visit a couple, 3 people or listen to them talk, you'll see they all have a different opinion. They all have different environments. And somewhere by evaluating all 3, say, of those people's environments and the quality of their plants, you're going to get guidance. So I really believe in personal mentoring when it comes to growing plants. Oh, and by the way, have fun. Now that I've given you all that. All right, so what's coming up? February 19th and through the 21st, the National Capital Orchid Society is going to be at Homestead Gardens with their show and sale. This is going to be a good one. All right, it always is. NCOS is well known for a beautiful show. Then if that's too soon, because that's like next weekend, all right, then the Maryland Orchid Society show is going to be March 11th through the 13th, and they are up in the Timonium, where they have the agricultural shows, the big campus. And that's in conjunction with the Maryland Home and Garden Show. There is an admission fee for that. Generally for NCOS, the first one, there's no admission fee. There is for MOS, the Maryland Orchid Society, but it gives you access to the entire Maryland Home and Garden Show. So this is an all-day affair. So you can see a lot of different gardening stuff and doodads and equipment and all kinds of fun stuff. And then the last on my agenda is the Southeastern Pennsylvania Orchid Show. This is an international orchid show. So if you're really serious about just burning up your visa, this is the one you want to go to. April 8th through 10th at the Oaks Exposition Center. And it's, again, a big, big venue. They're still requiring masks. This does have an admission fee, but the show will knock your socks off. So there's 3 shows upcoming. Try to catch one, all right? So meanwhile, back to our regular program. So when you look at an orchid, what do you want it to do for you? All right, is it temporary decoration? You've got company coming, or maybe you just like to keep an orchid on the kitchen counter. Okay, or is it going to become a long-term houseplant in your collection? Because your intent is going to govern how you handle it. Okay. All right, so I always get the question, are they difficult to grow? No and yes, because orchids are the largest family in the plant kingdom with about 35,000 species, depends on the taxonomist. So there is an orchid for every environmental condition that you can think of and then some. But when I talk about Phalaenopsis, which is the picture on the screen, are they difficult to grow? No, they're really, really easy. And then the other question I get all the time is, how do I get my orchid to rebloom? And how do you get anything to rebloom? You grow it well. If you grow it well, it'll rebloom. Okay. So how do you know which orchid to try? And if you go to these shows, you are going to see 100 different varieties or more. That CPOS show in April, oh my gosh, it just blows your mind. There's so many different kinds of orchids. So how do you figure it out? Well, one is just self-educate, go to shows, look at plants, talk to people, but you want to analyze the environment that you have, because there are things that I can teach you how to do. There are things that you'll learn how to do, but there are things that are more difficult to change. And one of them is sunlight. And you can see on this windowsill, those orchids, mostly Phalaenopsis, there's a dendrobium in there as well, are in direct sun coming through the glass. So now I speak from the position of growing in the home in the mid-Atlantic states. It's going to be different if you're in Maine. It's going to be different if you're in San Francisco. It's going to be different if you're in Florida. So now we're going to talk about mid-Atlantic states and growing in the home through that glass window. Did you know that even regular glass, not high efficiency glass, pulls out UVA and UVB? Now, UVA and UVB are the things that drive photosynthesis. So you want your plants to grow and have lots of energy for buds and flowers and leaves. They're going to need some sunlight or artificial light, but that's another whole talk. Sorry about that. So look at your environment. I like to break orchid growing down into like 3 simple steps. The first one is light. Did I mention it was light? Yeah. Remember that picture? It's light. Light really is the most important thing. Second most important thing is going to be proper watering. And we'll talk about that. All right. Because, oh my goodness, can you kill an orchid by improper watering? Oh yeah. And then the third most important thing is one that very rarely gets talked about, and that is repotting. And I'm going to talk to you about that too. All right. So from the beginning, we know that all living organisms require some form of energy to maintain life. We eat good food, all right, and that maintains our resources so that we can run around and play in the garden, or on a day like today, look forward to tomorrow when it's warmer and play in the garden, okay? So that source of energy for plants is sunlight, okay? Did I say that already, sunlight? I want to draw your attention to this Cattleya sitting on the edge of my friend's counter. Her family room is over here, and this is a southeast exposure. So you can see even on the counter, which is kind of interior to the house or interior to the room, she's getting direct sunlight on that plant. That's a good idea. All right. Okay, so a little bit of science. You know, you've heard of photosynthesis, all right? that is the process that only plants can do. It's pretty astounding. All right, that's where radiant energy or light is converted into sugars and starches. And we depend on those sugars and starches. That's what we eat, okay? In the plant, those sugars and starches are stored, and then they're used to fuel growth, reproduction. We call them pretty flowers, but to them, it's all reproduction, all right? But growth, reproduction, and plant defense. Did you know that plants had an immune system? Yeah, they do. There's no quiz, so you don't have to memorize the formula. But if you remember way back in college, photosynthesis, there it is. So, excuse me. So within the leaf and sometimes other structures are these little organelles called chloroplasts. And that's where the magic occurs. So that's where the chlorophyll is stored. That's where the conversion occurs. Excuse me. So I reiterate, the most important element in the art and science of growing orchids in the home is sunlight. And here are two very good examples of the cat having to share her perch in the sun with this person's Phalaenopsis. And then on a table in the corner of the room, this nice little collection, and they're all in the sun. Okay, so you've got the basics, okay, sunlight, watering, and repotting. But in the meantime, you've got to deal with the packaging. So orchids come into the retail market, and I don't care where you buy them. There'll be a good number at the shows that are like this. You go to a good nursery like Merrifield, and believe me, it's one of the first places I go in Merrifield. It's the houseplant department, and check out and see what they have in the orchids. Yes, I do. I'm committable here, all right? But even they, or IKEA, or the grocery store, a lot of their Phalaenopsis in particular are going to be presented in a cachepot, in a ceramic cachepot, or some kind of outer covering. Within that cachepot is going to be usually a soft pot. Okay, so it's a soft squishy pot. And in there, there's holes in the bottom of this pot. There are no holes in your cachepot. So it's really important for you to understand that when you water this plant, you've got to take the inner pot out of the cachepot. Don't put water in there because it's going to be a swamp. And one of the quickest ways to kill an orchid, well, I can think of a few, but one of the surest ways to kill an orchid is to water it in that cachepot and have water stand in the bottom. So these guys are epiphytes, which means that they grow in the air. Their roots are not set up, physiologically not set up to stand in water, okay? So you never want to water as you buy it. Make sure you take this to the sink to water thoroughly. This stays dry. That's what I mean by dealing with the packaging, okay? Also, another thing to know is that unfortunately, most Phalaenopsis come into our marketplace as throwaway plants, like poinsettias, like florist mums, like the Rieger begonias, the things that we buy to sit on the kitchen table. For a few weeks, when it starts to drop its flowers, it gets tossed, all right? They didn't ask me. I would have said that that would be horrible to do. So anyway, that's why it comes in packaging like this, because the growers, the manufacturers, the suppliers anticipate that you're going to throw it out. Oh, don't do that. All right. The second most critical element after light is going to be watering, and this is where people can really get into trouble. Now, I showed you the cachepot, all right, with no drainage, but there was an inside pot. Sometimes the inside pot is a hard plastic pot. You can actually see the roots, which is really a nice help, and there are holes in the bottom. So rule number one, pots must have drainage. They've got to have holes in the bottom, because again, the epiphytic lifestyle has a tendency to want to be dry. I mean dry between watering, okay? And you're not going to get that if it's in a cachepot with no holes. And you've watered in there, okay? It's sitting in water. All right, so it's important to know, regardless of what plant you're growing, and this could be your Christmas cactus, This could be your Dieffenbachia, whatever you're growing in your home. Overwatering is not the volume of water that you put through the pot, but it is the frequency with which it is applied. So I know mom said water once a week, dear. Moms are good for lots of things, but she erred on that one little bit of wisdom, that bit of mom wisdom. You want to be able to, regardless of the plant we're talking about, orchids, whatever, you want to judge the relative dryness of the medium before you water again. And then you have to know, well, how dry does this plant want to be or need to be before it gets watered again? So like if we're talking about a maidenhair fern, maidenhair ferns, like, no, don't ever let me dry. Okay, if you let me dry, I'm going to shrivel up and I'm going to haunt you for the rest of your days, at least in my life. I don't grow maidenhair ferns very well. But on the flip side, if you grow succulents or cacti or orchids, they need to dry between waterings. So you need to be able to judge your medium, stick your finger in it. How heavy is the pot? To know when the next watering interval should. And then when you water, take it to the sink, water thoroughly and deeply. I like my kitchen sprayer, and I will play the water over the surface of the medium on both sides. Don't worry about getting the leaves wet. You can always just blow out the crown or take the corner of a paper towel and dab out the crown. So we don't like having water standing in the crown of a phale, but that's easily taken care of. You do want to wash the dirt off the leaves. In my house, my knickknacks probably all have dust on them. My orchids, no, okay? I have my standards. So when you water, water thoroughly and deeply, but make sure that the pot has reached the appropriate degree of dryness before you water. And once a week, generally, does not work. All right, so part of the problem in telling when to water is the fact that in orchids and Phalaenopsis in particular, they can come to the marketplace with a variety of different kinds of media. And then what do? So you can see that there's this chunky mulch-like stuff that's called bark. It's a fir bark. And that's a very dry medium. It's going to be difficult. I mean, you stick your finger in that even 2 days after you've watered, and it's going to feel dry. And you're going to go, well, am I supposed to water? What's going on here? Or it could come to the marketplace in this, this long fibered sphagnum moss, in which case, depending on how it's potted, it could be really solidly packed. They do that in Taiwan. It works for them, does not work for us, or fairly loose packed. In sphagnum moss, I like this medium largely because you can tell when it's wet and tell when it's dry. So if the top, like ½ inch, or I like to say a digit deep, is crunchy, bone, crispy, I really mean dry, then water. And don't water until that top ½ inch is crunchy, crispy, dry. But meanwhile back, what about the bark? Well, if you're lucky enough that it's in a clear pot, then you can see the relative level of moisture. Moist roots are going to be green. When they dry out, take a look at this one above the pot. They're kind of silvery or ivory. So when these roots turn ivory, all right, they lose the green, and you can see the condensation level go down, then water. Depending on the medium, figure it's going to be 10 days, okay? Because these guys need to dry between waterings, not moist. I know you think jungle, it's going to be hot and sweaty and juicy all the time. No, because they're an epiphyte and they're hanging out on the branch of a tree with no medium, no moss, no nothing. They actually dry pretty fast after a jungle rain event. So they do spend a part of their time, a good part of their time, with the roots actually surface drying. So we need to imitate that. So if it's in a chunky medium, in a clear pot, wait until those roots go ivory and are no longer green. If it's in sphagnum moss, which looks like this, then you want it to be crunchy, bone dry on top for about an inch. You don't have to mine all the way down to the bottom. Just the crunchy top will do you, and then water thoroughly and deeply. All right. Oh, ice cubes. I don't know about you guys, but Phalaenopsis, their antecedents originate in the Philippines and Indochina. Has anybody ever been there? I mean, it's like 95 degrees is a walk in the park. It never gets below 60. I don't know about the temperature of your ice cubes, but my ice cubes usually run around 32 degrees. No. So the temperature is not good. So why does this even work? Why did anybody even come up with this? Because the physiology of a Phalaenopsis is such that it will hang on to its flowers and look beautiful, even if it is drought stressed. And that's why you want that medium to dry between watering events, because if you water it too frequently and the roots stay wet, the flowers will drop and you'll think, oh, I've done something wrong. So the ice cubes is a prescribed amount of water that's keeping the plant constantly drought stressed, which means that the flowers stay on and you're happy, and you're going to throw it away anyway when it's through blooming, but you'll be happy enough to buy another one. So this is a really good marketing ploy, but in general, it's not good horticulture. If you want to will your plant to your grandchildren, you don't want to water with ice cubes. Okay. So to understand water movement in a plant, let's take a look at how does water move through a plant? And this goes for any plant. So this is a general question. So water comes into the roots, it travels up the stem, and then it evaporates off the leaf. All right. That's called evapotranspiration. Now, what happens here is the cool properties of water molecules. I'm sorry, more science. You know, you've got an oxygen, you've got two hydrogens, and you know that negative charge and positive charge attract. Well, except in water, because the hydrogens actually attract too. So you've got the two hydrogens wanting to stick with the oxygen, and then you've got the hydrogens of this molecule wanting to stick to the hydrogens of that molecule. So it makes this Congo line, okay? Everybody's kind of hanging on to everybody else. So enters the roots, kind of arranges itself in the stem in this Congo line. Everybody kind of is attracted to everybody else. So when a molecule evaporates off the top of the leaf, it pulls its neighbor right up with it. So you get this movement through the plant, all right? And there's a lot of science that I didn't bother with you talking to you about that. But so water moves through the plant, evaporates off, pulls the next guy up. So why am I bothering to tell you this? Well, because you need an air-water balance within the medium so that the roots are healthy and can draw that water into the plant and up through the leaves. So in this representation, the little blue dots stand for water, and the smaller white dots stand for air. So this is a good air moisture balance. That's what we want in our medium. So when we overwater, all of our air spaces fill up with water. Why do you care? Because the cells in the roots, okay, root cells right here, they need to metabolize. They're growing and they're doing stuff that roots are supposed to do. When they don't get oxygen or air for their metabolism, because when they metabolize, just like with photosynthesis, you've got carbon dioxide and oxygen going and coming and going and coming. When they don't have that air, the cells die, they collapse. Tissue is an invitation for a rot pathogen. You don't want to go down the slippery slope. So keep that in mind. You've got little air spaces and you've got little water spaces. When you overwater, you fill the air spaces with water. All right, end of science, but I think you've got the idea now. All right, so the third critical element is repotting. Now, you've already maybe caught on to the fact that most of the orchids that you buy in the store are on a one-way trip, according to the manufacturer or the grower. You're going to bloom them, you're going to enjoy them, you're going to throw them away, and repotting never even enters your mind. Or maybe it does, and you kind of go, no, I'm afraid. Okay. So the cool thing about orchid roots is they don't have root hairs. So I can remember when I was growing up and gardening with my mom, and I did that from like a little kid on, she would like, oh, be careful of the roots. You don't want to damage the root hairs. Well, epiphytic orchids don't have root hairs. So when we repot, we actually want to take out all of the old medium. Because we repot, we repot because the medium degrades, it composts, it becomes more dense. We lose all those little air spaces. Remember, you just learned about air spaces? We lose the air spaces, the salts build up, and this is a salt sensitive plant. So when we repot, we remove all of the old medium and we put in new medium. And here you can see this root has been cleaned up. This is fit the new root mass to just fit in the pot. Remember, no, these guys like to be comfy, all right? And then this person is using sphagnum moss, taking it in little tufts and putting it gently around the roots, kind of working it in with your fingers or her fingers. You don't pack it because remember, air spaces, all right? Now, choices. What do you repot it in? What kind of medium do you use? Oh my goodness. So I'll start off with a few things. So this really pretty pot that may have the words orchid pot written on it, it doesn't work for the mid-Atlantic states. All right, you do not need nor do you want those slashes in the pot. That works really, really well for very wet environments. South Florida, where things never dry out, or the wet side of Hawaii, where things rarely dry out. Okay, so these are pretty pots and they're very lovely, and you can grow an orchid in there, but it gives you a little bit higher degree of difficulty. What I generally recommend is to use a standard nursery pot, nursery plastic pot, slip it into your pretty pot, okay? That way you get the pretty pot and you get kind of a more uniform growing area. The plastic pots moderate the dry off rate, so your Phalaenopsis doesn't dry too fast or too slow. So for that matter, clay, which for some people is the gold standard of pot. In our homes, it actually dries out just a little too fast. Now, you can accommodate if you really, really want to go with clay, but there is no advantage other than that preconceived notion that clay is better than plastic. By the way, I want to point out that these green nursery pots have been UV stabilized. I clean and sterilize these, and I have some in circulation that I've had for over 20 years. So when you think about, oh my God, I don't want to add plastic to the waste stream, I get it totally, and I agree with you. But a better plastic pot, okay, not a cheap plastic pot, is going to last you for several plants, okay? The other thing, I forgot, the other thing about clay is that it retains salts, and salts damage roots. Now, these little slash pots are okay. The slashes are kind of minuscule. You don't need them, but sometimes the only way you get a small pot is by going to this slashed pot, and that's okay. So there's actually three main types of media that we use commonly. One is the sphagnum moth, which is very high in moisture retention. So living is very, very easy, but it's really easy to squish the air spaces out. So when you use sphagnum moth, you never want to pack it, right? If you come see me repot, you'll see that I keep it very fluffy and light to make sure that I've got air throughout. Bark, which is a traditional medium, is a very dry medium. It has low plant available moisture. And that is plant available moisture is the criteria that we put on different kinds of substrates when we go to either put together a mix for if we're growing pansies or petunias or whatever. We want to see what does it bring to the table if I mix that with other things. So sphagnum moth has high plant available moisture, but low air. Bark, low plant available moisture, but abundant air. So you are not going to water the two different kinds of media illustrated here the same. Your bark might actually be once a week, all right? If you use a clear pot, you can see how it traces through the medium, the water. If you use sphagnum moth, very, very easy to tell by touch. So choices, choices, choices. What works for you is what you learn how to water to. Okay, so let's look at what medium does. Well, it holds the plant upright, and that doesn't matter whether you're outside in the garden or inside with your house plants. So it supports the plant. As I just belabored the point, it holds air and water in a mixture. So now I hope you're catching on. All right. This, by the way, is a Phalaenopsis that I've potted several times. It belongs to a lady who lives in Virginia, and the plant's name is Old Faithful because it blooms every year. It was also given to her by her mother, so it's got some sentimental value. And you can see that is in spike, and that's a pretty darn good looking root mass. So when she brought that to me to repot, I said, good job. Look at those pretty roots. All right. So the downside of medium is that it holds salts. Okay. And if you've ever seen on your Phalaenopsis, see this browning, this blackening of what I call the shoulders of the roots, that is salt buildup. Every plant that we commonly grow, inside, outside, doesn't matter, is more or less sensitive to salt buildup. So think of junipers. Well, you go to the beach and there they are they're on the shore. They get that ocean spray full of salt, and they're like, yeah, man, that's just the way we roll. Whereas Phalaenopsis, you start losing roots through salt buildup. What are you going to do about it? Well, that once a year repotting helps, and that's what I do recommend. You want to repot as soon as it's out of bloom to get it out of the grower's medium, because the grower's medium has decomposed, it's shrunk and compacted, it's lost its air spaces, and that plant, when you buy it, has been really pushed with fertilizers, so you've got a lot of high salt content in the medium. You want to get it out of the medium that it came in and into a medium that you understand and know how to water to. All right, so repotting on a regular basis drops your salts. Also top watering, so water from the top, let it run through, pulls some of the salts. So where do the salts come from? Well, they come from fertilizer. So one of the things that I recommend is that you not fertilize your orchids. You just heard me say that. Do not fertilize. Don't fertilize until you've got them on a good cultural program with everything else, light watering and potting medium. Then when you start growing root masses like this, all right, then maybe add a little fertilizer to the regime. All right. Reason being is when you're dealing with a salt sensitive plant, we've got salts that are in our municipal water, salts that are in our well water, fertilizer salts, and you're going to end up killing roots. And when we grow on a windowsill, we don't want to kill roots. We really want a good healthy root mass. So salts are a real issue. I think I've belabored that point enough. All right, no salts. So we talked about repot as soon as it's out of bloom, and then annually every year thereafter. Okay, and then why repot? I've gone over this a lot. The medium has composted, and if you guys are gardeners, you know when you take organic medium and you compost it, it compacts, and all those little air spaces are out the window. We need that. So you repot to reestablish the air moisture balance in your medium. You use it because you repot because you want to decrease the salts, and you want nice, healthy, happy roots. And Phalaenopsis are cool. They're like a slow growing vine. Over the course of a year, they are growing slowly right out of the pot. So a lot of their new roots are coming out over the pot medium, and you go, why are you doing that, honey? Get back down into the medium. Epiphytic plants, they do this. In nature, they climb to get higher up on that tree to get the sunlight. Sunlight's really critical, okay? And you repot the first time for a couple of reasons I told you. They've been fertilized to death, all right? The medium has compacted, but also the medium was formulated for the grower's monster greenhouse, not yours and mine. So you want to get them into a medium that you know what it looks like when it's wet, what it looks like when it's dry. Okay, how do I choose which medium? Again, the one you learn what it looks like when it's wet, what it looks like when it's dry, because the plant, the growing environment, and your watering regime all have to kind of coordinate. All right. And remember, with Phalaenopsis, you want it to go dry. Now, not dry for weeks, please, but dry between waterings. So in a bark-based medium, hopefully it's in a clear pot. You can see how the water moves down the pot, or maybe it's been about a week, 10 days, it's time. With the Sphagnum Moth, let your fingers do the walking, all right? When it's crunchy, crunchy, crunchy dry on top, water. So in a plastic pot, and the reason I like plastic pots is that you can tell how wet or dry a plant is by weight. So when you bring home your orchid, you put it in the sink for that first watering. Feel kind of relatively how heavy or light it is. Put it in the sink, water, 45 to 60 seconds, let it drain. Then feel how heavy it is. Then every couple of days, lift that pot. How heavy is that? When it is dry, it's going to be light, and you know now is the time to water. So you've got tactile feedback, particularly on sphagnum moths. You've got time, but don't let that be the deciding factor. And you've got pot weight if it's in plastic. So 3 ways of telling that it's time to water. All right. I already mentioned fir bark is low in plant available water, dries out readily, but it holds a lot of air. And the premium New Zealand sphagnum moss, high plant available water, living is easy, but you have to pot very fluffy to make sure that you hold air. So it does not hold air as well. And yes, you can blend the two. That's legal. And a lot of people do because they want the air holding capacity of the bark, and they want to be able to stick their finger in it and tell when it's time to water. All right, so what else does your orchid need? Humidity? No, generally not. That is a fallacy. Take a look at feel your Phalaenopsis leaves. Then if you've got like a Sansevieria or a succulent in the house, feel their leaves. Oh my goodness. All right. Phalaenopsis has that thick, waxy coating. Humidity is generally not a requirement. So you don't have to mist them. You don't need pebble trays. Pebble trays are really good for growing fungus gnats. Don't go there. And no humidifiers. Now, that's for Phalaenopsis, Oncidiums, Cattleyas. There are a lot of other orchids where humidity is an issue, but if it's for Phalaenopsis, don't have to go there. Fertilizer, generally no, okay? Because your water quality influences your fertilizer. They've got to go together like love and marriage. So if you really want to be accurate with fertilizer, you're going to test your water and find out what the mineral content or the total dissolved salts, TDS, is of your incoming water. And then you're going to buy the fertilizer that meshes with that. So if you go to the store and they say, here's Jack's 20-20-20, that's what you want. You say, no, thank you. You're going to want fertilizer with those 3 digits in single digits, okay? 4, 3, 5, 5, 2, 3, something like that, okay? So if you really feel like I can't give up my fertilizer, just make sure it's in single digits. Now, temperature with Phalaenopsis, and generally most of our main genera, the ones that you can get in the trade, is shirt sleeve weather. If you're comfortable, they're comfortable. So generally not below 60, and they take 95 degrees much better than I do. What about the bad guys? Oh, yes, we do. One of the things I highly recommend is that when you bring a new plant into your collection, always isolate it. Put it on the kitchen table for a few weeks so that when you drink your coffee and eat your breakfast, you can kind of give it a good look. And you're going to see if there's any insects on that plant coming in. Now, you're going to say, well, I buy from a reputable nursery. They're not going to have insects. Yeah, they will. Okay, because if they've got 20,000 plants in their greenhouse, and yes, we're talking those numbers, and they have 1 or 2 plants, or even 10% of their plants with 1 or 2 insects, they consider that good. If you bring that plant home and it's got mealybug, these guys over here, or scale, and it's a big deal to you, but when it comes to managing a big greenhouse, those numbers are really quite manageable for them, okay? For us, maybe not. So isolate your plant. What you want to do is for scale and aphids, this is a tulip leaf, by the way. I couldn't find aphids on it. Aphids don't generally get on orchid leaves. Flowers sometimes, yes. All right, but mealybugs you'll probably see. You'll probably see scale. I just turn on the faucet, moderate stream, temperature is comfortable for me, and just with a little finger pressure, wash them off. That's all you have to do, wash them off. All right, you don't need alcohol. Alcohol is not a pesticide. And if you've got tender new growth, alcohol will burn it. So alcohol is not your go-to. Water, just simply turn on the tap, do a little finger pressure, wash off those edges. I like to use a child's paintbrush to get down in that nooks and crannies, and I just scooch things out. You're done. And most of the time, that's all you need to do is wash them off. So I'm going to wrap it up and say, do I have any questions?
Thank you so much, Carol. Yes, we have a lot of questions coming in. Just want to reiterate to everybody that if we don't get to your questions today, we have Carol's email, which we'll be sending out following the class. I'm going to start with questions that are a little more general because I know we have some specific ones coming in. So I'll start with ones that relate probably to most people on the call, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Carol, can you talk a little bit about the lighting? Is there a particular type of lighting that's better? So we've had questions like, is west facing window better? Do you need south facing window? Does it need direct light? What's best?
Okay, for Phalaenopsis, I generally recommend about 2 to 3 hours of direct sun on the leaves. So an unimpeded, that means nothing outside, unimpeded east-facing window is usually fine, all right? But that means that there's no overhangs, there's not a porch, there's not a magnolia, you know, an evergreen magnolia or pine tree outside, and that helps, okay? But at least 2 to 3 hours. Now, on the flip side, if they acclimate, and they're going to be like me in April, I'm going to sunburn, but by July, don't tell my dermatologist, I acclimate and I can go and stay outside all day long in the sun. So we acclimate to higher light levels over time. So do they. So you will sunburn your plant when you make the sudden change. All right. You've had it on the credenza in the foyer for the last 2 weeks. And then how long was it in the store? Didn't have good light in the store. So it's gotten kind of all soft and unacclimated. And then you put it in a west facing window. You're going to get sunburn. So always start it in like bright indirect light, and then take a week or two to gradually move it into some direct sun. That way you'll avoid sunburn, but you will, I mean, sunlight really is the accelerator pedal on growth. So you want to give it as much sun as it will be comfortable. And you. You're muted, Sally.
Thanks. My dog started barking.
Okay.
All right. What causes the tips of the leaves on the orchids to die? And is there anything you can do to prevent that?
Okay, so we're not generally talking about Phalaenopsis. We'll see that in Oncidiums. We'll see that on Phragmipediums. Sometimes we see it on Paphiopedilums, and it usually indicates root death. So that means it's been overwatered, or it's been 7 ages of man since it was repotted, and this poor thing is dealing with root dieback. So the first thing you always do is check the roots, find out what's going on.
All right, thank you so much. Here's the next question. When the orchid flowers are done blooming, should you trim the stems or the spikes that don't have flowers anymore?
Depends. Don't you hate that? Okay, this is not a straightforward and easy answer. So it's February. For the Phalaenopsis, I'm going to talk Phalaenopsis specifically. For the Phalaenopsis that are winter spring bloomers. So this is going to be your pink, white with pink lip, the whites, white with stripes. Most of the pinky whitey ones bloom, their bloom season is now. So typically a happy, healthy phale is going to send up a bloom spike in December, January, elongates and starts to maybe open buds, maybe February, March, maybe earlier, you know, they're individuals. And it'll give you like a clutch of flower buds, 6, 8, 20, You can do 20 flower buds on a spike, girl. You've made it. All right. And then they'll bloom from back to front. Now on towards May, June, you've lost a lot of the flowers on the back part of the spike, and you still have a couple that are hanging on the front. Decision-making time. Sometimes some Phalaenopsis will continue to elongate, and you may not like this long spike with a little pom-pom on the end. So now you can break it or cut it, make sure it's sterile, break it where that first flower came out. And if the plant is getting enough sun, has a good enough root mass, and mature enough, from one of the nodes, because you're not cutting down low, you're cutting down where that first flower came out. So you're going to have spike, all right? From one of those nodes, it'll give you a secondary spike, okay? So that's that time of the year. So let's say I have a winter spring bloomer. It gave me one flush of blooms, second flush of blooms, and it's relatively young. It's 4 or 5 years old. It might bloom more, but I'm like, no. Maybe it started to bring up new leaves from the center. That's my clue. It's changing from I'm going to make flowers in reduce mode into I'm going to make leaves in grow mode. At that point, I'm going to cut the spike all the way down at the base because I want it to spend all of its energy in making me big, fat, new leaves because, hey, photosynthesis, sorry, right back to that science, isn't it? All right. So one of the ways that you can pat yourself on the back is if you take a look at your plant, it's not in bloom, but take a look at the succession of leaves. So you've got leaf that, the one leaf, second set of leaves, and maybe then you come into sets of leaves that you can credit to yourself. Each new set of leaves should be as big or bigger than the previous set of leaves. That's what you're going for. I know you want lots of flowers, and me, I want you to have increasingly larger leaves and lots of roots because I know if you do what I want, you're going to get what you want.
Thanks, Carol. All right, next question is about the nursery pots. Do you use particular nursery pots that are specifically for orchids, or can you use a generic nursery pot is there a difference as long as it has drainage?
Yeah. So I spent a good chunk of my retail nursery background buying pots. So we should go out and have a libation and talk about everything I've learned about pots. It's a lot. So I like a standard hard plastic nursery pot. It'll be made by Cord or Dillon, except both of those companies have been bought out. I'm like, oh no. So it's UV stabilized, it's green. I prefer azalea, which is like 2/3 of a standard. So standard pot, standard 6-inch pot is going to be 6 inches high, 6 inches across. And azalea is going to be like 5.5, because in case you haven't figured it out, roots for most plants grow out. They don't grow down unless they hit the sides of the pot. So I like a wider pot than a deep. Okay, so wider than deeper pot. And did I answer all that question, Sally?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next question. We have some questions coming in about issues with getting the flower either to rebloom or with the buds falling off. So I'll give you kind of both scenarios.
Okay.
The first one, someone has an orchid that just won't rebloom, and so they want to know if you have any tips for them to investigate. The second one is that they have an orchid, a Phalaenopsis, that is putting up spikes. It gets buds, and then the buds turn brown and fall off. So
okay.
Scenarios.
So let's talk about my orchid won't bloom. Did you follow my directions? The best way to get an orchid to bloom is to grow it well. And with orchids, sunlight is key. Did I say that enough? I said light. I should go back and count the number of times that I've said light in this PowerPoint. It really is a function of light. Now, having said that, if you've got a collection of, let's say you've got a dozen Phalaenopsis, you're just starting out. Yes, a dozen is just starting out. It's a slippery slope, folks. All right, and everybody grows well, blooms fairly well, except one. And you're treating them all the same. You're doing the repotting, you're on top of your water, you know what you're doing, they're getting the sun. Okay, why does that one not bloom? could be virus. All right. And virus in orchids doesn't always make spots and streaks and all kinds of uglies. Sometimes it just retards growth. Now, that's no reason to throw it out. Go through your checklist. Make sure, is it getting enough light? When was the last time I repotted it? When I repotted it, did it have a good abundant root mass? Or was it maybe coming back from what I call a rough childhood? In other words, it was in Safeway and the florist people said, water, water, water. And when you bought it, most of its roots were rotted off, which segues into the second question, Sally. All right. So when a plant spikes up, it's got the urges, but it can't follow through with the buds. A lot of times it's got an inadequate root mass, or if you just bought it, okay, and you bought it in bud, it's got all those little buds, and then they just go, boom. You could have overwatered it. Overwatering is a really good way of getting it to drop bud. It could have been exposed to ethylene gas. Now, generally, most providers of orchids know not to ship orchids in a truck with foliage plants. Foliage plants give off ethylene gas, and you're in that truck for 8-10 hours, all right? And that will cause the flowers and buds to drop. So presence of ethylene gas. So don't put your Phalaenopsis near the bunch of bananas or apple display, okay? Because they're giving out ethylene gas, could cause the buds to fall. All right, so usually it's problems with the roots, all right, or the presence of ethylene gas. And I know you're gonna read about, oh, it got a draft or something. No, huh? No, sorry. These guys are really tough. I have carried in orchids to orchid show. I used to do orchid shows all over the country. And we would carry in orchids in January and in February and have to walk a block. And yeah, they were in boxes, but oh, the temperature dropped and they never lost a blossom. But if you overwater them, they sure will. All right.
All right, thank you. That's good info. All right, so when you're repotting, we have some questions about the roots. 2 questions that we can start with. The first is, do you trim off the salt damaged roots or any of those? The second is roots that are growing out of the top of the pot. Do you put those into the medium when you replant?
Okie dokie, both really good questions. So when you take the plant out of the pot, you're going to notice that the roots are long, even in the pot, they're coiled around. And when you look at an individual root, it might have a salt damaged part, and then maybe it's got a good part. And then as that root coiled and was down near the bottom of the pot, maybe it's got a little place of where the outer covering, the velamen, is smushy, but then it curled back up around and it's got another good part. So what do? I just use my fingers and I'll strip off the mushy parts and I leave the solid parts. If you cut that off, you could end up cutting off all your roots, and that's not the direction you want to go in. Don't worry, you don't have to be too much of a tidy tilly, just kind of clean them up. You don't want really big smushy roots because you're going to use that finished cleaned up root mass to determine what size new pot it goes in. So once you've cleaned up and triaged the roots, you choose your pot so it fits. No grow room, fits. Because remember I said phales are slow growing vines and they're crawling out of the pot, which leads me to the next question, which is, what do I do with all of those roots all over the place? Well, if you haven't repotted annually, some of those roots can be really long. If you moisten them, if you soak the roots for about 10 minutes in tepid water, they become a little bit more malleable and you can curl them around and put them back in the pot. I do, when I repot, I do curl those roots back into the medium, usually because I'm repotting for other people. And some people find them a little disconcerting. They look like snakes. I like snakes. Some people don't. And depending on your environment, they're going to stay moist and succulent more readily inside the pot than out. So yes, I put them in.
Okay.
Unless, now, sometimes you get a Phalaenopsis that has a set of leaves and then it's got a root. And I'm like, well, that one, forget it. There's no way you're going to get that in the pot. That phale has chosen to have that root wafting around in the air, and you say, okay, for whatever you want.
Okay. We've had some questions coming in about like second plants growing from the first plant, or like,
Keikis.
okay. So what do you do about those? Are they good? Are they bad? Do you want them? Do you separate them?
Maybe. Can I just say maybe? All
Maybe,
right.
yeah, maybe's fine.
Maybe. All right. So we're going to talk about Phalaenopsis because keikis, which is a Hawaiian word for baby, keikis happen on other types of orchids for different reasons. Okay. But on a Phalaenopsis, sometimes you have a bloom spike and then you have a baby and you go, what? I wanted a flower. Put it back. I want a flower bud. All right. So the first thing to do is check the health of the mother. There are some Phalaenopsis species that are inclined to make babies up and down the spike, but a lot of times it's because the mom plant is in distress. So cross that, check the roots, make sure that they haven't been rotted off, that it's a good, healthy root mass. If it's still got the good, healthy root mass, repot mom, the keiki, leave there. You can't do, I can't have a birthing until the keiki has, my rule of thumb is 3 roots, each 3 inches long. You can cut it and then you can repot it. If they don't have enough roots, they're not going to be able to support themselves off of the mother spike.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Quick detour. Here's a question from someone who's been working with Phalaenopsis for a while, and they want to know what other species are best to try next.
The ones you have the light for. Because even though I've been talking about phales, I've been saying light, 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 light. It's pretty much light, 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 light for all of them. If you have just Phalaenopsis light, let's say you have that 2 to 3 hours of direct sun, I don't care what direction it comes from, and you're feeling good about phales. Now, do you know that there are, oh my gosh, there are so many different kinds of Phalaenopsis. You can spend the rest of your life just growing different kinds of Phalaenopsis, and that'll keep you out of trouble. All right, but if you want to go to a different genus, I would suggest maybe Paphiopedilum, the lady slippers. They're a little bit more diva-like. They don't automatically bloom every year, and they demand repotting annually, and it's got to be a small pot or they go into a hissy fit. So they're a little bit more demanding. You might try Oncidium intergenerics if you've got a little bit more sun, like 3 to 4 hours of sun. I liken Oncidium intergenerics are like the daylilies of the orchid world. You've got usually tremendous hybrid vigor, although the bloom stalk may only last maybe 4 to 6 weeks. When it's growing really, really good, you'll get multiple spikes and it will probably bloom more often than once a year. So Oncidiums, Paphiopedilums are the ones that come to mind first off.
Okay, great. And that actually, in terms of light, that leads into a few more questions. We have one question from someone who has only north-facing light, so they have not ideal light conditions. Do you have any recommendations for them? Is there anything they can do? Okay.
Yes. So what I generally recommend, if you've got 1 or 2 phales and you've got that north-facing window and you're really not getting any direct sun whatsoever, I'm sorry. All right, what I'll usually recommend is getting, and several people have tried this, so it seems to work. Get an LED screw-in regular light bulb. You know, it's a replacement for an incandescent, like you'd have in a table lamp, okay? And it'll be the LED replacement, the equivalent of like 150 watt incandescent. You're gonna get more light, all right? More foot candles, more lumens, more whatever out of that LED, and then put it in like a gooseneck or clamp on so that the bulb is about maybe 6 to 8 inches away from the foliage. Put it on a timer that times with daylight. So dawn, dusk, all right? And you now have a burglar deterrent because you've got a light on a timer. But what you're doing is you want to use that light that comes out of the north facing window, and you just want to supplement it from the backside, okay? 6 to 8 inches away. If it's way, way up here, plant's not even going to know that it's there, all right? And then there's growing under lights, which is like another whole talk.
Yeah, so we have a few questions about that, like what types of lights to use. We have
I use LEDs. I have gone to LEDs. I'll do it. I'll do a 2-minute presentation.
Okay.
So LED technology is very, very cool. And in the industry, because LEDs are being incorporated more and more into controlled environment growing, greenhouse growing, there's actually a movement afoot to actually get them standardized and to get them into something other than lumens or kelvins. Lumens, kelvins on your package, that has to do with human perception, has nothing to do with what the plants need, and they don't equivalate into photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR. All right. So in my perfect world, every light bulb would have PAR on it, so I know that I can grow plants under it. You can tell my world does kind of revolve around plants. But what I have found is that the shop lights, yeah, they're 48-inch 2-tube solid state LED shop lights that you can get in certain wholesale warehouse areas for about $30, actually a very high in PAR. They say nothing on it that it's for plants, but I have a quantum meter, which is what measures PAR. So I go around measuring people's LED lights just to see, well, wait a minute, who's really delivering in PAR, and they don't even know it. So yeah, 48-inch solid state 2-tube, about $30 from Costco. If they're still there. Now, we do have supply chain issues, and it actually delivers. Now, remember that the light intensity falls off by the square, or decreases by the square of distance. So you're talking about the light being about 6 to 8 inches above the leaf. And I'm done. That's all I'm going to say on lights.
I think that's good information for the people who are asking. That's a great starting point. We've had a few people ask if they can take their orchids out in the summer, or if you recommend that.
Okay, maybe. Don't you love these maybes? All right, if you have a screened in porch it's got a solid roof, so you control the watering, and it's in part sun, part shade, or really bright indirect light, but it can enjoy the humidity, great. Remember that it's going from a very cushy environment where all the UVA, UVB have been filtered through the glass. So you're going to have to start it in the dark corner and gradually bring it into more light. It will sunburn, okay? But just to put it outside and let Mother Nature overwater it, yep. You know, our weather pattern now is very, very rainy, and it's going to get overwatered. And then there are squirrels, and then there are katydids, and there's slugs, and there's ants, and there's sow bugs, and there's a million critters out there that are just going to love to live in your orchid. And then you're going to bring it back in, and you're going to freak out. So controlled environment outside, great. Just out in the wild blue yonder, not so good. All right, lots of issues that might occur. Overwatering being the big one.
Okay, great. Thank you. All righty, let's see. Oh, I had one that I was going to ask next. Okay, do you have recommendations of potting mix for transplanting repotting orchids? Like, do you have, like they asked about the Miracle Grow version?
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Miracle Grow makes potting soil. It does not make orchid mix.
Okay, that's good. Okay, no Miracle Grow then.
Well, okay, maybe they do, and I'm just not familiar with it.
Okay.
No. The mixes that you buy, Schultz makes one. Miracle Grow might actually do one. It's been a while since I've been looking at them, guys. The mixes are not made for the mid-Atlantic states. You open them up and they've got big, chunky things. And I'm like, what is this, for Hawaii? I mean, this is just not appropriate. What I showed you in the PowerPoint is what you want.
Okay.
Fir bark, that long fibered golden compressed bale of Sphagnum Moth should be light golden color. Does Merrifield? I think Merrifield carries it.
I think we do. I think we have all this stuff. So I'd have to check, especially like said supply chain issues. But if you all want to contact us, we can probably help you with that.
Yeah.
We carry a bunch of stuff for orchids. So
But it's really, if you take the information I gave you on the PowerPoint about what does sphagnum moth deliver and what does bark deliver, just start with the basics. You don't need a lot of other stuff in it. You don't need charcoal. You don't need olive perlite. You don't need that. All right. The manufacturers make up a mix and they put the word orchid on it because they want you to buy it. It's not necessarily what you want. And every time you get a different mix, you're going to have to relearn how to water that mix. So make your own.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know. All right, I found the question that I had in my list to ask next. How often can you expect these orchids to rebloom? Is it once a year? Like, is there a waiting period? When?
Okay. All right. Talking about Phalaenopsis and talking about typical Phalaenopsis, because, oh my gosh, I can talk for hours just on phales. Assuming you got a good sized plant, you didn't get it from the pity shelves, 50% off, been abused. I know your heart cries out to it, but you're going to have a longer time getting that guy back into blooming condition. So let's say somebody gifted you with this huge, beautiful orchid, 2 spikes, wonderful. You follow all of my directions, comes out of bloom, you repot it, everything is great. You've got it in the sunlight. When do you expect it to rebloom next year? So they're like azaleas and oak trees and everything else. They have a season. Now, having said that, most of our orchids originate in Taiwan, which is kind of where they're native. So it makes sense. And they have been breeding for decades to get phales to bloom more often than once a year. And they'll kind of do it, kind of. I don't see that it's quite as good as Oncidiums or Cattleyas. But yeah, so once a year, but multiple spikes and several clutches of blooms off that spike. But make sure that you let it grow a new leaf or two. Okay, it's part of the cycle.
Okay. Is there any way to encourage orchids to grow more buds once they've put the spikes up?
Nope.
No.
Done. And really, now what you're talking about, see, in my perfect world, all of you out there would repot your phales, and every year you would have a little bit bigger leaves, you'd have a few more buds, and then next year, a few more buds. And then maybe the year after, you've got double spike. Oh my gosh, I get a double spike. All right, so progressively, if you stick with your culture and you grow that plant well, you're going to have increased more flowers. There was one that used to come to me for repotting every year, and it belonged to someone who's probably passed on now because this was years ago. 14 spikes. She'd had it for more than, she couldn't remember. She said, oh, it's Carol. Maybe it was about 15 years. I don't know, might have been about 20 years ago. And yeah, it was a Phalaenopsis, but it was grown to the magnificence that these plants will. The leaf span was over 24 inches. It was huge. And it was just a phale. It was just a Phalaenopsis that she got heaven only knows where. Nothing special. But it was somewhere between 15 and 20 years old. That's what you grow for.
Okay, great. We have a question here about, they just want to know if you can talk a little bit more about dendrobiums and brassavolas. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly.
No, you get it. You got it.
Well, I know there's a lot of different types of orchids out there, so I don't know if you have any quick tips, if it's similar Carabrel to the Phalaenopsis, or if that's anything that can be addressed.
Dendrobiums are the largest tribe in the orchid kingdom. There are more different kinds of dendrobiums than there are people in the phone book. No, not quite that bad. A lot. I urge that person to email me so that we can get down to specifics. And brassavolas are a member of the Cattleya family. And when it comes to Cattleyas, it's sunlight, sunlight, sunlight. But I already said that for Phalaenopsis, but it's more sun. Now you're talking about 5 to 6 hours of sunlight through the window, generally.
Okay. All right, next question is about the leaves. If someone has a mushy, squishy leaf.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's not good. Okay.
No, mushy leaves are never good. And I say, go back, look at the roots, look and see what the condition of the roots are. Although this time of year, and I'm seeing a lot of this, people don't, because we've had some really, really nasty cold, really like teens, you know, nighttime temperatures in the teens. And it's where a leaf was touching the window. And it's just like wilted lettuce. It's just cold damaged. So that can happen. But if this is, the leaves have gotten progressively just wilted, probably the roots are rotted off or are greatly diminished. So if you don't have a vascular system, you can't get the water from the medium up into the leaves. So always, if the leaves are looking wonky, look at those roots and see, are they good looking? When was the last time you repotted? How often are you watering? Remember, it needs to dry between waterings. I know that's tough sometimes.
Is there an ideal water temperature to water at? I mean, I'm assuming you said not to use ice, so I'm assuming not super cold, but do you need to make sure it's lukewarm or just room temperature?
I like something that's comfortable for me because I'm a little bit of a seal. When I water, I'm splashing water every place. I'm getting it on me. So yeah, tepid, not hot, not cold.
Okay, great. If someone notices, here's the opposite problem with their leaves. Their Phalaenopsis leaves are getting smaller and they're sort of shriveling up. What is that?
It's the same answer.
Same answer. Okay.
Look to the roots.
Always.
I mean, this is why when I teach anything about horticulture, and I teach a lot of different horticultural courses, you know, the roots are like, if you don't have good roots, everything else goes to kaflooey. So yeah, roots. And again, I go back in when somebody asks me about either mushy leaves or just wonky leaves, I'm thinking, you know, I'm seeing that plant in that same medium for a couple of years now that it grew in and has been sitting in the cache pot, and the roots have been rotting off. The cool thing about Phalaenopsis in particular is that it takes them a long time to die. It's a terrible thing for me to say, but they will diminish over time. And then people wake up and they go, this doesn't look right. Well, you've been messing things up for the last year and a half. So it's nice to start out right. Or if they've got the soft leaves, take it apart, repot it, get it in that nice sphagnum moss, downsize the pot. You're going to need a smaller pot. The root mass declares the pot size. If the leaves had just been kind of smaller and smaller, take it apart. Look at the roots, triage, put it in sphagnum moss in a smaller pot, and it'll start up again. It may take you a year to get it back to blooming, but it'll be a really good exercise for you. You'll really see how plants grow.
Thank you. All right, here's an interesting question about dealing with pets, which I'm sure we both can appreciate. So this person says, if I add a fan for air circulation and an LED plant light above, can I place my orchid in a bare fish tank? One of my cats likes nibbling on plants.
I hear you. I am blessed. I probably have more orchids than I can count. I mean, it's probably like 400 or 500. Okay. And right now I have 4 cats. The cats don't care. They don't pay any attention. So I'm really lucky that they don't. Now, if the orchid has really grassy leaves, like it's like a spider plant, you know, that similar, oh, they'll be on it in a heartbeat. What I found with spider plants, because it's very attractive, and I can't have ponytail palms. I love ponytail palms. I can't have them. They're grassy. The cats will just love them. Is I hang it out of their reach. And I find that that's actually better than putting in a terrarium with a fan, with a light. That's like too much work. I like the hanging it out of the cat reach much better. Just a thought.
Okay, that's great. All right, I'm going to try to get to a few more questions. I think we've addressed most of the big topics. So everybody just send me anything in that we missed. But here's a question that I've not heard of this before. What's your opinion about water culture?
I'm picking my words carefully.
Okay.
I've been growing rare plants for all of my life. And you can tell even through Zoom that I wasn't born yesterday. you always go back to how that plant is being grown in nature. If you want to grow it well, you go back to how it grows in nature. Should I just stop there? I have no idea why anyone would even think about growing an epiphyte whose roots need to dry profoundly between intermittent rain events and grow it in any kind of water culture. Now, when in times when I had a regular venue to repot, I held an orchid diagnostic clinic, and I would see about 1,000 orchids a year, grown by maybe 600-800 people, just not commercial. And now and again, I would get someone who wondered why their water culture orchid looked horrible. And it had no roots, because water culture will not foster a good root mass in an orchid, period. Now, orchids, I'm going to get a little scientific here. Orchids have Crassulacean acid metabolism. This is the same metabolism as a succulent, which means if you give it enough sun, it's a drought adapted plant. Now, there's two ways that we can drought stress a plant. We can not water it, or we can rot off its roots, which means that with water culture orchids, generally what I see is not a good root mass. The plant is living on its Crassulacean acid metabolism. It's because it's drought stressed. So it's severely drought stressed, but with enough sun. Remember, orchids are going to bloom because they need to reproduce. They don't bloom because we love them. They bloom because they need to reproduce. And a stressed plant, it will put its last bit of energy into flowering, because that's reproduction. So you can have a blooming orchid that's just living by its little fingernails, and it'll still bloom. So water culture, it's not the direction to go in. It's not how they grow in nature. That's not their metabolism. That's not their physiology.
Okay.
I'll shut up now.
That's good information for sure. All right, so we have a question from someone, and I'm waiting to see if she can tell me whether these are the same type of orchid or not. She has 2 orchids. One of them blooms continually, and the other one only blooms once a year. She says she thinks they're the same kind.
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen? Is there a reason for that you would know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Genetics, because they're being bred to have longer bloom periods. All the breeders are working on all different of the main genera. So yeah.
Okay. All right. That is definitely interesting.
Genetics. Now, what she should, though, the one that's blooming a little bit less, take a good look at those roots and make sure that your culture is adequate. I get a lot of plants in clinic that have had what I call a rough childhood. All right. They were sitting in the retail shelves for months, in not enough light, in too much water, but they hang on to that bloom stalk. That's the last thing to go. And you buy it and you figure, okay, I can resurrect it, or maybe you don't know that it's just hanging on by its little fingernails. And that one is just retarded in its growth cycle. So it's going to take a while to catch up. So your good culture is going to bring it back so it'll achieve its genetic potential. It'll reach its genetic potential.
Okay, that's good information. Here's another question. All right, we got a few more minutes. Should you ever trim the leaves? And if so, when?
Why would you want to do that? Okay, and this is a good question, because I've noticed working with people in general, if a leaf turns yellow or it gets a spot, they want to cut it off. And I'm like, why? Why are you doing that? So the rule of thumb is, if you have 40% of that leaf intact, green, and photosynthesizing, don't cut it. All right. Now, if it's got a browned edge and it really just bugs the heck out of you, okay, trim the edge, but don't cut the leaf. So really, there's no reason to cut leaves in general. Now, Phalaenopsis will have natural senescence. So some of the lower leaves will transfer all the water and nutrients into maybe a new leaf that's growing. So the lowest leaf will gradually turn yellow from the far edge in, while the new, and what it's doing is just transferring, it's recycling. Okay, it's moving the resources from here to the new leaf. Let that happen. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no disease. All right, it's recycling. So let it process. Okay, I hope that if you sunburn a leaf, I always, with my a little perverted, I said, yeah, you didn't, you sunburned the leaf. Yeah, leave it there so you learn by it. No, that's when I'm mean. I'm not mean. So no, generally you're going to have to put up with some boo-boos and spots, because again, Phalaenopsis at best are going to give you 2 leaves per year. You could cut that thing down totally. It's not a pansy. It's not going to, give its miracle grow and it'll replenish. You're only going to get 2 leaves per year. So every square centimeter of leaf surface that's green and functioning, you cherish. Enough said.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about tap water versus filtered water? I know we discussed the minerals and things in the water. So is there one that's better than the other?
I was thinking that the charcoal filters and the Brita filters were taking out salts, and then I learned that they're not. And what really, chlorine, fluoride, they don't care. Orchids are not sensitive to them. So know that if you put the jug of water on the counter overnight, that the chlorine will not vape off. I'm sorry. Municipalities started using chloramine decades ago. And if you're a fish aficionado, you have to use a dechlor to get rid of chlorine, but don't worry about it because orchids don't care. Chlorine doesn't bother them. Fluoride doesn't bother them. So really the only thing in municipal water that would bother us is total dissolved salts, the mineralization. And most of the time for most people in the DC area, just use the water you have. Watch for salt damage on the shoulders of the roots. Watch for salt buildup, all right, around the bottom edge of the pot or inside the top edge of the pot. And if you find that you can't go a year between repottings and you start getting salt buildup, maybe every 3rd or 4th water use distilled and run it through from top to bottom abundantly. See if you can pull some of those salts down. But I try to make watering easy, because if it's easy, then it'll happen. If you make it more complicated, like you've got to save up water from the air conditioner or water from the ice maker in your refrigerator, becomes laborious. So I fear that it's not going to happen. But just use your municipal water, repot, and most of the time that works fine.
Okay, that's great. All right, I know we're running short on time, so I have one question that's kind of just a fun one that a few people have asked, and then I'll turn it over to you for any final comments and notes. We've had several people ask what backdrop you're using. They love it.
I don't have little kids, but that's a Japanese amine film. It's an animated film, and you guys with kids probably go, oh, well, that's Toto and Friends or something. I don't know. I can't remember. But yeah, it was a free download, and I said I like that because my head. You can see the little guys in the background, but my head covers, and I'm a horticulturist. I surround myself with plants 24/7, 365, inside, outside. I got plants.
I love it. That's fun. And you are surrounded by plants in that background. Yeah, we had a few people ask about that. Someone said mesmerizing, so they want to know what it is. So,
yeah.
All right, since we're short on time, is there anything? Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a lot of questions. I'm sure you'll get some emails following this class. So reminder to everybody, again, we'll be sending out an email with Carol's email and with some other information. And is there anything that you'd like to wrap up with before we close?
I don't know, go out, buy orchids, have fun. Just make sure you wrap them up this cold weather. They don't like it. Don't leave them in your car at 30 degrees. You will have those mushy leaves. So yeah, enjoy. They're so wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much, Carol. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. And again, keep an eye out for that email tomorrow if you want to follow up with us or with Carol with questions. Carol, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Class.